Before we begin today, I would like to say thank you to our patrons. So major thank you to Dustin Miller, Dave Jackson, Ryan Yingling, Poppy the Keaton, Eric Guess, Chris Copleen, Charlie Young, Colby Moyer, Cody Dawson, Nikolai at Night, Chris from A Novel Console, Alex from Low 5 Gaming, Backlog Adam, and JD. These amazing folks have decided to patronize the show, and their generous support is immensely appreciated. If you want to be like them, you can head on over to patreon.com/pixelprojectradio. We've got a variety of tiers to choose from that can fit a variety of budgets, and with each tier, you get bonus content. Things like extra episodes monthly, our schedule 2 months in advance so you can keep up with all that we're doing, voting privileges to decide what the bonus episodes are, and more, depending on your tier. It's never expected, but it is always appreciated. So once again, if you want to check it out, you can head on over to patreon.com/pixelprojectradio. Thanks. Let's get on to this special remote interview that I conducted with some local business owners all about retro collecting, retro gaming, and more. Welcome back to another episode of Pixel Project Radio, the video game discussion style podcast where we do deep dives on all of the games that you love and some that we love too. You can look me up on price charting, and if you're looking to get a CIB copy of me, well, you're going to pay a pretty penny. It's me, it's your host, Rick. I hope you're doing well. This is my podcast. Welcome to it. Unlike me, this podcast comes at the cool price of free $99. So before we begin, as always, stick around to the end if you want to hear where you can find us on socials. We'll talk all about our Discords, Twitters, Instagrams, Blue Skies, and all of that jazz. Today, I'm really excited because we have not only some special guests, but more guests concurrently than, or simultaneously, that's the right word, than we've ever had before. It's a full house, baby. Today, we are talking all about retro gaming and collecting, and with me, I have got some great folks from a local retro store, Warp Zone, where past is present. Please welcome my guests, Nick, Carey, Nicole, and Adam. Folks, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Glad to be here.
Yep, me too.
So, since there's so many of us, I thought I'd ask everybody to go around and say a fun fact about themselves. No, I'm just kidding. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask each of you, if you wouldn't mind, to just introduce yourself however you'd like to, and tell the listeners what one of your favorite consoles of all time is, and one of your favorite games of all time is. Nick, do you want to go first?
Sure. My favorite console of all time would have to be the NES, and my favorite game of all time is Super Mario 3.
It's a classic. We've got plenty of folks in the Discord arguing over which is better, Super Mario World 3, or Super Mario World and Super Mario 3. Terrific game.
That's always my debate too. I always have a hard time deciding between the two.
It's a tough one. They're both terrific. And since you all just heard that mellifluous voice, Carey, why don't you go next?
I'm going to have to go with Super Nintendo for system, and it's an odd pick, but I feel like it's one that doesn't get picked enough. I'm going to go with Monkey Island.
Classic, very in vogue right now with that remake that I understand is pretty good.
I have not played the... I've played the special editions that they came out with, but I have not played the newest release of it, the newest sequel.
Gotcha. Just to keep us moving along, Nicole, do you want to say hello and tell us a little bit about your favorite consoles and games?
Sure. Hi, guys. My favorite console is, just like Carey, it's the Super Nintendo. It was the first console I ever owned, and pretty much what I primarily collect. And my favorite game is also a Super Nintendo game. It's kind of a weirder one. It's called Plock. It's a platformer type game, but the soundtrack is pretty kickin'.
It is included on Warp Zone soundtrack via Nicole.
Oh, believe me, we've got plenty of Plock fans in the server. They're gonna be happy to hear this. And last, but certainly not least, is friend Adam. Adam, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I will pick up the slack for the other three and come in for Sega. First console I ever got, and still my favorite, is the Sega Genesis. My favorite game, the one that really got me like full into gaming, was probably not Sonic 2, but Gunstar Heroes. A really good treasure game, plays a lot like Metal Slug, and it's my handle on pretty much every internet thing I can get my grubby hands on, including where we're recording this call on Discord.
That I've actually not heard of that one. That's the first of them that I haven't heard of.
Yeah, I would. If you like your running guns like Contra and stuff, you should check it out.
Hey, if there's two things that anybody knows about me, it's that I like running and I like gunning, believe it or not. So today we are talking all things retro gaming, retro collecting, and I'm really excited for this conversation. I've talked about this story on the show before, but I've always had an interest in retro gaming. My first console growing up was the Sega Saturn, and to this day, it's one of my favorites of all time. And it's interesting. I've been somebody that does emulation for as long as I've been playing video games, or at least as long as I've known what emulation was, because it's convenient, and we're going to talk about that throughout the course of the show. But I happened across a local store in my town called Warp Zone one day, actually on my birthday in December of 2022, happened to find a Sega Saturn CIB, which was crazy to me. Just what are the odds? And I bought it sight unseen, took it home, tested it, worked great, and it's still sitting on my shelf today. And that kind of revived my interest in and sparked my new love of collecting retro games. And I'm really excited to talk about this with all of you. I think before we start, a good point of reference would be to just give a quick and dirty definition of what constitutes retro. There are kind of two schools of thought, putting it into classifications, like retro versus modern, or having a cutoff date, such as, X console and before. I think for the purposes of today, and I think this is a widely agreed upon definition, and if you disagree, feel free to speak up, but I think 7th generation, that is to say PS3, Xbox 360, and everything that came before it, is what we're going to consider retro for the purposes of this discussion. Is that fair?
I think that's fair, because I think other people get up in arms about what's considered modern versus what's retro. But I mean, it's different perspectives for different people too. You know what I mean? It's the kind of thing where somebody who is now become an adult, whatever their early system that they, I usually say the age between like 8 and 12, that's going to be retro to them. You know what I mean? So it may not be retro to an older dog, but you know what I mean? It's going to be retro to that person that's their early nostalgia for gaming.
Yeah, well put. Well put. I know different folks have different opinions, but, we've got to lay a hard line somewhere, and may as well lay it here, right? So I want to get into some just introductory discussion and talk about what made you all interested in retro gaming. We're not recording on camera right now, so this is a little bit of a free-for-all, but I'll kind of try to do a mixture of calling on folks and then also just letting you kind of steer the ship because you are the guests. So I don't know, Adam, why don't we start with you? What got you into retro gaming and retro collecting?
It's funny. It was actually, I'd always kind of went back and forth. I never really stopped playing older games, but what really set me, especially in collecting, but really started it heavily, we had a local store that I ended up working for back when I lived in New York, that opened up, and that's where I got my Sega CD that I fell in love with, and that's where I got some older games that I had had as a kid. And pretty much from that point, in 2010, 2011, I basically got it was pretty much all encompassing. And that's when I started doing videos on YouTube and stuff like that. And it's pretty much never stopped until now, 12 or 13 years later, whatever. I can't keep track of dates anymore.
Hey, this isn't a math podcast. I don't care about any of that. How about somebody else? Who wants to talk about how they got into retro gaming and collecting? Nicole, what about you?
So, as a kid, like I said, my first console was a Super Nintendo, and throughout the years, I was lucky enough that my parents kept all my old consoles, or I kept them and, was able to play them. So I pretty much have all my original consoles as well as all my original Super Nintendo games and stuff. when I was in college, that's actually where I met my wife, and she too is a game collector. Primarily, she collects PS2 games. So I think meeting her and going to different local game shops, including Warp Zone, we used to hit up the Exchange in Oakland a lot. Kind of, reinvigorated that spirit to start collecting things. And I'm a bit of an old soul, as I think the rest of the guys will say, but so I'm one of those people that believes in maintaining and keeping up with all the old physical copies of games. Not that I have anything against emulating or digital, but especially with the older ones, I just like playing on the old hardware itself. So, yeah, I mean, and I definitely think that, working at Warp Zone has increased my love of collecting as well. I know that sometimes when you work with something that you love, it can make it a little less shiny and admirable and something you want to do, but I still really love it. So,
Oh, here. I unfortunately know that feeling all too well. And shout out to Nicole's wife, who's got great taste. PS2 is one of my favorite systems to collect for, along with the Saturn. That's awesome. Carey and Nick, do you have anything you want to add?
So again, just like Nicole and Adam, I've been gaming since I was a child. Atari being my first system. Whenever I would consider it a collecting, you know what I mean? Like that was the thing is like when I first started game collecting, people looked at me, weird that I said that I collect video games. And I was like, why is that weird? Some people collect porcelain kitties, you know what I mean? So it was like back then it wasn't even considered something to collect, you know what I mean? Which I thought was a strange perspective to receive from other people. Uh, it was probably like early 2000s, probably like 2002, 2003 that I started to actually collect it. It's like, this is something I'm going to actively try to get as many old games that I think the thing for me too is I was going to school and I moved back home to go to PTI. And while I was there, I dug out my NES and the little collection of games that we had, because we didn't have a lot. We had like 10, 15 games for it. And I played through them and got hyped up over it. And then I kind of had a hunger to play ones I didn't have. So it was like the next thing I wanted was the Castlevania trilogy, and I didn't have it. And at the time, I think I ended up winning it for $30 free shipping on eBay. That's how cheap it was by comparison, where one of those cartridges would cost that, let alone the whole trilogy plus shipping. And it just kind of escalated from there. You know what I mean? I was out there looking for stuff all the time. And what was great too is at the time, GameStop had just discontinued taking that stuff in, and that's where I was working while going to PTI. And people were coming in with boxfuls of that stuff. And they wouldn't take it. So as soon as GameStop's like, yeah, we can't take this, I was like, hey, let's step outside. And then people were just selling me giant boxfuls we weren't like looking stuff up or anything. It was just like, how much for the box? You know what I mean? And it was just like, my collection just kind of escalated. And then it kind of turned into Warp Zone.
Oh, save that for whenever we get to the store questions. We'll get there. Believe me. Nick, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, sure. Unfortunately, I didn't have any siblings, and my babysitter was action figures and video games when I was a child. I was the only child for a long time, so that's what I was given to entertain me and keep me calm when people were busy or not home. I collected and stayed with figures for a long, long time. I was very well known in different places and scenes for figures. Video games was something I was on and off with. Anytime I sold my games, I would keep, like, of course, Super Mario 1, 2, 3, Super Mario World, and then sell the systems. And then eventually in my travels, flea markets, yard sales, conventions, I would see an NES or a Super or N64 in a bin and buy it cheap enough, buy a couple of games, start playing again, and so on and so on. And then when I moved to Pittsburgh roughly 11 years ago, I had maybe like 50 NES games, a Retron, actually it was a twin, and a handful of scattered like Marvel fighters and stuff, but no real systems but a PS3. And I got connected with Warp Zone through action figures again. And
Ninja Turtles.
Yep, Ninja Turtles started the Warp Zone friendship. And he, of course, sold video games and told me about a couple of local groups. And as soon as I started hanging out at Warp Zone, I started recollecting my games and hunting down games in the game groups, and it just lit that fire again that I actually ended up getting a full NES set within 2 years. And then I got an N64 -1. I almost got the full set. I wasn't willing to pay for Sculptor's Cut. I got too stubborn. And just, I've never really stopped. I don't have full sets anymore, but I still collect PS5 and Switch and PS4. So, I mean, it's not that I stopped. I just don't have all my retro consoles like I did. But again, it's just something I was always on and off with my whole life. And I still collect figures to this day.
Man, that is awesome. We've got such a diverse set of tastes here, and I think that's just terrific. I'm really looking forward to this next part of the discussion where we kind of open up the floor and talk about what retro gaming and collecting is just as a hobby. But first, we do have something in our Discord called the Community Forum, and what I do is I put out the call to our Discord members and have them give their thoughts about the game that we're playing. This time it was a little different. I just asked very open-endedly if any folks had questions they wanted to pitch in for a listener question segment. And we got a couple. So first off is a question from Ryan from the List Off podcast, and this is one for everybody. Here's what he wants to know. How many consoles do you currently own and actively collect for? And what is the crown jewel of your collection? So I leave it to you all, whoever wants to go first.
I can go first. So I actively collect for, I would say probably, like, including handhelds, like 12 consoles, probably, maybe more. Like I said before, Super Nintendo is my main focus, and PS2 is my wife's main focus. But in saying that, I mean, we have PS1, I have a couple NES games, and everything in between there, all the way up to the modern consoles, the Switch. No PS5 yet, up to the PS4. The crown jewel of my personal collection is probably, it's a tough toss-up between the CIB Super Mario RPG, or I did also get a CIB Artie Lightfoot recently for the Super. Those are two probably my favorites. I also have a CIB Plock, but that's a little less well known. And yes, but so those would probably be my crown jewels at this point.
I have to just interject about how Nicole included Plock, but indicating how it's important to her. That's the thing for me, is some of my most treasured and prized things are not even that valuable. So it's to me, real quick one before I tell you the other elements was just to stop real quick, Nicole, were you done, or I didn't want to interrupt either? Okay. I just wanted to interject about that. When we moved here, I was happy to discover that it had not been lost. I have my original childhood Zelda map from the first Legend of Zelda on the NES. And the reason it's so cool, it's not like mint condition or something like that. It's in the condition that I left it from childhood. So it's all the white squares are drawn in crudely, you know what I mean? So I knew what those panels were. But to somebody else, that's not going to have any kind of great value. It's going to be a damaged map for Zelda. But I don't actively collect for many systems anymore because I've been doing it for a while, and a lot of the systems I have what I want for it. I used to be trying to do the completionist thing. I was trying to go for a full CIB set of NES games, and I got almost 2/3 of the way there. But I just realized I was spending big sums of money on games that I didn't even care about. So I didn't want to just keep doing the collect it all scenario. I was just going to get, so I sold a lot of big boys I had, like Donkey Kong Jr. Math, CIB, and stuff like that, to fund other games that weren't even as valuable, but they were important to me. So I'd say if you were going on a monetary scale, somebody would probably say CIB Earthbound or Chrono Trigger in my collection. But like I said, the ones that are more important to me is my CIB Monkey Island or something like that Zelda map.
Absolutely. I mean, sentimentality and, just personal affection speaks more than monetary value in a lot of instances, I think. Really well said to both of you. Nick, do you want to, can I lobby the ball to you?
Yeah, sure. That's a tough one for me. I guess me personally, everyone in the household is a gamer and a collector. So everyone in the household has multiple consoles and collects for everything. So it's hard for me to just say myself because I feel as a household we count. But I only buy for myself, I would say PS5 and Switch. Here and there, I'll buy like a title for a random system, but those are the ones I actively collect for. Because I sold a lot of my retro stuff, I've had games that I can honestly say are damn near impossible to find. Many jewels, but they are gone. They were sold to Warp Zone. Something I currently have that I would consider a treasure for me is my CIB PS2 Yu-Gi-Oh! Duelist of the Roses. It actually has the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards in it. So that might be my jewel out of all the ones I have.
And since Nick hasn't indicated, he is a big Yu-Gi-Oh player as well, in addition to action figure and video game collector. He has the third vice as well.
Yeah. My prize card will probably be my first edition starter deck Yu-Gi Dark Magician card.
That is awesome. I think all the time about how I miss the old days of Yu-Gi-Oh! Before things got buck wild and you could just chain summon your whole deck and end the game in one turn. I miss it. And hey, Duelist of the Roses, man, that's on my list to replay. I've got it CIB over on the shelf too, but I don't have those cards, unfortunately. What are you going to do? Adam, last but not least again, you want to tell us about how many consoles do you collect for and what's your most prized possession?
So as far as how many I collect for, there's no console I don't. Like my wife and I have been basically like pretty much collectors ever since we've been married. And we're still like, we're almost done with hardware. We've almost gotten pretty much every piece of hardware we could want, but like every time we think we've finished with something, unless it's a system that we actively have everything for, even then, like we end up looking into imports and stuff. Like that's the great thing about retro is that like everybody feels like it's kind of, all been discovered, but it really hasn't. I always feel like even somebody who's been around it for over a decade, like I always feel like somebody introduces me to something different or new. Every time I talk to somebody different. Although actively right now, I've been playing my Game Boy Advance quite a bit again and my PSP. So I haven't been like hardcore seeking anything out, but like if things run into me, it's been the PSP and Game Boy Advance, like handheld stuff. I'm gonna cheat a little bit, because I genuinely like I'm in my game room and it's like so hard to whittle it down. Sentimentality wise, I actually have a copy of Eye of the Beholder for Sega CD, which is one of the systems I have a complete collection for still. And the reason I have such an affinity for it is the soundtrack is the reason I really wanted to play it. It's done by Yuzo Koshiro, who is one of my favorite composers for any video game. And I was lucky enough to meet him many years ago at a gaming convention. I got to sign it and talk to him a few minutes. He was so excited that I brought, not that he disliked Streets of Rage or anything, but like he was just so shocked somebody brought such an obscure game to him, and we had a really nice talk about it. As far as my crown jewel, I do own a complete Game Gear collection, CIB. And I've beaten over 180 games on that system, so like they've almost all been played at this point. So like I can't pick one Game Gear game, but that Game Gear collection's my baby.
Oh man, there are going to be a few folks in the server that are just thrilled to hear that. Yuzo Koshiro, didn't he do the music for Shenmue?
He did some. I think that was a collaborative soundtrack, so I think he may have done a couple of tracks because it was still Sega, but he didn't do the entire soundtrack.
Okay. Still cool. Again, man, we just have such a diverse set of tastes here, and I think it's going to make this discussion really, really valuable. So let's talk a little bit about what this hobby is. Retro collecting has really been around for as long as games have been. It's, the notion of what makes something retro changes as time progresses ever forward. We're fast approaching PS4 becoming considered retro to many people, I'm sure. But at the core of it, it's, we're collecting pieces of history. That's how I always like to look at this. It's actual pieces of history, gaming history, that with any luck are being preserved by the folks that are buying them and collecting them. That's the hope, right? That's the best case scenario in most of these situations. So I wanted to just start with a broad question. What about collecting retro games and playing retro games? What makes that fulfilling to you? For example, my slant on it is largely for the historical aspect. I like being a part of history, or feeling like I am a part of this history, and keeping that safe and well cared for. And it's just fun. I mean, I'm brave enough to say it. I'm a white guy with a microphone. Retro gaming is fun. I'll say it. I'm not afraid. So, so what about this hobby is fulfilling to all of you?
Honestly, if anyone that knows me is probably going to be like the thrill of the hunt for you. And that's the truth. The thrill of the hunt, as I'm hunting specific games on my radar or trying to complete a set over the years, I'll just get a game or a franchise in my mind. And I don't have patience. They can all tell you that. I don't have patience. Like, I hunted down every single Yu-Gi-Oh game on every console within a month? Not even. I go a little nuts. I will say all of the good reasons and all of the bad, all of the above, everything you could think of, I will say yes to. But the biggest thing for me is the thrill of the hunt. That nothing makes me it's fun. Anything and everything you guys can say, but the thrill of the hunt is always my biggest excitement. That high in the middle of my journey, going out into the world, seeking what I may or may not find. Just driving 50 miles, 20 miles, 10 minutes to Warp Zone, to the exchange, to anywhere. Like, seeing what they have new on the shelf, seeing if they have one of the games on my list. That the traveling, the excitement, the fun of that gets me the most out of anything you can say.
So do you yearn for the days of pre-eBay and pre-Facebook where folks will just buy stuff up and flip it, kind of reducing the in-person inventory?
Yes, even when I was doing my sets, people were like, "Oh, you probably did eBay." No. I would drive to West Virginia, Ohio. Till this day, last resort is online. I have to be desperate and tried to the point of frustration to find something, because I will ask friends of friends. I will go in groups. Hey, does someone have this for sale? And I'll try to meet with them, like a local Pittsburgh group, one of many local Pittsburgh groups, or toy and video game groups. I like to buy local. Again, I like to go get it in person. It's that thrill of seeing it in person, picking it up in person, holding it, inspecting it in person. I am not a person that likes to buy online, not even toys. I prefer to go local and travel and check flea markets before I will ever go online. That's always a last resort.
And of course, we are fortunate enough to all be working at a retro game store at the moment. So, we get to see a lot of cool stuff, even if it's something we don't get to collect or we're not interested in collecting ourselves. We do get to see a lot of things pass through the store itself. So I think that definitely helps Nick too, and our robust retro community here in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I'll tell you, man. That way Carey doesn't have to be the one to say, I don't want him to act like he's tooting his own horn. But the magical stuff that has come through his door in the last 10 and a half years I've been hanging out there is ridiculous. You would never think, and I'm not trying to throw shade on his store or Pittsburgh, but it being a small business and being where we are in Pittsburgh, some of the rarest items you could ever think of have walked through his door, not even once, multiple times. Like even the NES TV. How many have you had? 5, 8? Well,
No. It's 3.
Oh, okay. It's been a few times. I mean,
this area in general is just so crazy for the cool stuff that we have. You know what I mean? I always joke that Yinzers are nostalgic. You know what I mean? And it's like, it's not an insult. It's meant to be. Like, that's just why it's a cool collector scene around here, because we didn't just get rid of our past stuff. You know what I mean? A lot of people, it's just the current thing is all that matters. But you know what I mean? When you're a retro game collector, it's a little bit different. You know what I mean? You like the thing for me is, like, what I always enjoyed about it was it's more of an interactive collectible. Yeah, and not to throw shade at you, Nick, but like, I'm not going to sit and play with action figures if I collect them. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm also not going to do, like, I love the pictures that you do, but I don't have the time or the patience to do that either, because that's a whole nother level of doing the props and stuff, and and I think it's cool to do lighting on that. But like, the thing for me, the interactivity for the video game is, like, you're a part of the media. You know what I mean? It's like, I was a big movie guy as a kid, and then as games, you know what I mean, advanced, it was like, oh, it's like you're in the movie kind of thing, you know what I mean? So it's like, it's a hobby that no matter how many times I switched or some new thing came along, like, oh, Magic, or oh, you know, I collect this now. It was always something that was still just there. You know what I mean? Even if the level of activity in it went up and down, I was always playing and collecting video games.
Yeah, and what's interesting about this media compared, and Rick, you talked about a little bit about your reasoning, and I'm kind of with you, is that it's the preservation and historical aspect of it too. You know, a lot of these games still aren't. You know, they talked about it recently through Frank, who runs the video game like foundation up at the Strong Museum and stuff like that. But like, there's like I think like 86% of all video games that have ever been made, you can't like. There's no legal way to play those games currently. And these things that these older games that we collect, they're a lot of the time some of the only ways to access them in their original like form. Not to say anything against emulation. We didn't have emulation. A lot of the stuff that we might have already been lost to time. But I think that's a big part of what makes the hobby so interesting, continues to be so interesting. Like, I know it's jumping ahead into more modern than retro, but like Switch collecting, like Nick's into, and I also do. There's a lot of those games where when the servers was shut down, and Nintendo is the most apt to shut servers down so far, it seems. Those games are going to be lost that were digital only, or games that have specific updates that change content or make the games functional, unless you have like the original cartridges that like have those pieces of content, or just have an original cartridge at all. Like that stuff's going to get lost to time without it. So like I feel like comparatively to any other medium, whether it be books, movies, music, like video games are the one where that loss of physical media will hurt it the most in the long run.
And that's a big reason why I switched to as much physical as possible as I can myself. I feel like we see it more all the time now when the eShops go down, or even thinking of, I can't remember that movie that got pulled from Amazon or something, but these digital storefronts can go down, and on a long enough timeline they will. Or, if you want to put a more cynical spin on it, like I tend to do anytime we're dealing with corporations, they can just take it away, and there's nothing you can do about it. Whereas, somebody's going to have to come to my house and pry my Game Gear copy of Beavis and Butthead out of my cold, dead hands. Well, that's not true. I would give it up much easier than that. I hate that game. But you know what I mean, right? Like, having it physical means that it is mine, and there is nothing anybody can do to take it away from me. And I think that's an important part of this hobby.
Just to touch on that real quick, Rick, like just as recently when the Mario Brothers movie came out, I had the original 90s Mario Brothers on Vudu. And I know I did because that's the place I would access to watch it with somebody in the store with my children. And like right when the new movie came out, it was gone. It just didn't exist on there anymore. And that's something I had already paid for. And it's like that stuff. I'm leery of it more and more when it's happened multiple times like that. But it's always some kind of timing like that. Like there's something to draw attention to that property, and now all of a sudden you don't own it anymore.
It's a shame. It's a shame, and it can happen on any digital storefront. What I'm not trying to do is fearmonger, folks that maybe use Steam, because I'm a big PC gamer myself, and I love Steam. Steam is a special case. It's not going anywhere, and I think most of us know that. But more to the point is, it's that digital ownership is such a new concept comparatively across history, and we haven't seen the ramifications of all of the scenarios play out. And is it maybe getting a little fearmongery or conspiracy theory-y? Maybe, but I think it's grounded in plenty of reality.
I've never judged any digital collectors, but me, for myself, that's the thing. Like, I don't have a large DVD collection, but the DVDs I do have are like my Marvel movies, certain franchises, Harry Potter, stuff like that, because you never know how that could change. Same thing as video games. Like Nicole said, I'm fortunate enough to work at Warzone. So anytime I want to get back into something, enough comes through the door for me to collect physical. It's just like, physical is like a trophy for me. Like, I physically own it. I can display it. I can keep it. If I want at that moment, I just put the system on, play it, and I have fun. I'm always paranoid that something's going to happen, that it's not going to be accessible. Again, if I want to trade them in and get credit towards a different system I start collecting for, or I just want to fund something else, I can't sell my digital. I can't, trade my digital. It's just different things for my personal reasons. I've always just been a physical collector. I've never bought anything digital ever. I love physical. I love seeing it. I love owning it, touching it, sleeping next to it, taking pictures with it. Like, I'll never stop collecting physical.
No, I totally agree with you, Nick. I think that, humans in general have that nature where, you like to be surrounded by things. It's comforting. I wouldn't go as far as to say hoarding. Obviously that's the extreme end of it. But I think, like Nick touched on, I wasn't sure if we were going to get there, but I mean, something about collecting games for me physically is that I am somebody that likes organizing things. I'm somebody that likes to reorganize it and redisplay it or whatever. And this gives me that opportunity that digitally collecting games doesn't really have. That being said, I think Megan has like 1,000 something games on Steam, so we're in no shortage there either. But I agree with Nick. If it's something I decide to fall out of love with, I haven't not wasted, but I haven't sunk that cost into something that I can't get any of the money back. And that is something that digital media intrinsically has attached to it. So
yeah, I love reorganizing my Cricut shelves from time to time.
I mean that's valid as any other reason, right? There's something extremely aesthetically pleasing about having a collection of something. Whether it's a collection of books or VHS tapes or what did you say, Carey? Porcelain cats?
Porcelain kitties.
Yeah,
that's always an example when somebody gives somebody crap about collecting stuff, and I was like, you're going to give that person crap, but not the person over here with strawberry collection.
Oh, okay. Well, it was a little uncalled for to bring up my strawberry collection, but I mean, I'll let it slide for today. Speaking of buying physical, and Nicole, I think you mentioned this idea of sunk cost. One thing that is often brought up in the same breath as physical collecting, especially since 2020 after COVID, is the idea of price. And that's a real barrier to entry to retro collecting. And indeed, I think that's a reason a lot of folks are selling off their entire collections. One of the examples that I love to use is from one of my favorite games of all time, Xenogears. Let me just check goodoldpricecharting.com here. Back in 2018, in October, a CIB copy of Xenogears, according to price charting, which, by the way, if folks don't know, price charting is just a way to see raw data for what the market value of various games and other goodies are. CIB Xenogears in October of 2018 went for $43, which is astounding if you're familiar where it sits today. Today, as of right now, in August of 2023, the average CIB price is $133.50.
And what's wild about it is it's actually, if you're not looking at it with it separated, I want to say the greatest hits is around 100, and if you have a black label, it's closer to 200. Like I consistently 180, and I think they're just doing the average of those two together, because like it's crazy if you look at the black label now, it's like 170 low end.
Yeah, the Xenogears Black Label and Xenosaga Episode 3 are easily my two most prized possessions.
Xenogears is one of my favorite games as well, Rick. I love that game.
Oh, buddy, I'm waiting for a day to program that onto the podcast, but that would be an undertaking and a half. But getting back to this idea of price, that's just CIB. We're not even talking about things that are still sealed. Or even loose. Loose for Xenogears right now is around 120, by the way. So thinking about price, I wanted to sort of bring that up here, and I'll lead off on that discussion with a listener question from Thrak, who is the co-host of the 3DO Experience, one of the only 3DO dedicated podcasts I know of.
Nice.
And here's what he has to say. He says, "How long until the retro game collecting bubble bursts?"
Here's the thing. It's just like any other market. I don't ever see like a true burst. It's just a fluctuation all the time. It's a wild fluctuation sometimes. And I'll be honest, sometimes I don't understand why something's trending down while something else is trending up lately. It seems a little more Wild West. Because here's the thing, that a lot of times something that's more common will drop. Like, for a while, Mario 3 was as high as like, $25, $30. Now it's a $15 or $20 game. But like, the big boys, even if they take a dip, they just bounce back ever stronger year after year, just like something like a comic book. We had a big crash on comic books because of the 90s saturation, but then they've, built back up to higher numbers than they've ever been for the pinnacle and key issues. You know what I mean? So it's the same thing, just like any other collectible. You're going to see dips. And I mean, there may be like, some kind of bubble, burst or crash or whatever you want to call it, but there's always going to be a build back. It's just the way it is. It's too big. And the way I look at it, if collectible cards and comics and figures can continue and maintain, video games have all the more footing because it's a bigger market. It's a broader audience. Like there's more people collecting video games than action figures out there.
I'm the newest collector of the bunch out of all of us on this call, so I am happy to take a back seat to this discussion.
One last point before you start, Nick. We have like 10 and 12-year-olds come in all the time and start an NES collection.
That's so cool.
I've seen 10 and 12-year-olds collecting Atari, and I can't believe it.
Because it's just like when we picked up comics in the 90s and late 80s for me, I wanted to see where the origin stuff was. I read the storylines that existed, and just like that, the modern games have predecessors. And you know what I mean? The kids, after they play their thing, they get interested and want to go investigate the predecessors.
And the only thing I was saying was I agree with Carey. I feel like he hit it right on the nose, because I was going to dip back into toys again. I know it's off topic, but he's right. Cards, toys, comics, video games. I feel like he's 100% right. It's stuff that's never going to go away. That's exactly what I was going to say. It's gonna go up and down, but it's never going to go away.
I will say my small interjection to this whole thing is that I remember the bubble burst talk happening when I was working at my old store in 2010. That's how long that like question's been being asked, and we've never really seen it happen. Just like Carey said, you're always going to see fluctuations, but there's never been a true bubble burst, and I don't really think that's ever going to happen to anything in the retro market. I don't think it'll ever happen to newer systems. You might see, the only difference is that you'll see, with the newer systems, a lot of games will get reprinted. So until, what people say is rare for a newer console now may not be the case a few years down the road, but like, I don't think you'll ever see a true bubble burst or a crash happen to the game market unless like a lot of other things are happening that aren't so good.
We're living in like a Fallout world. That's the only time I see it.
Yeah. I think that's something that we never really think about, like when we're working at the store level, interacting with customers on an everyday basis, is that a lot of people are influenced by watching, like especially younger people are influenced by watching people on YouTube, Twitch, any other, streaming platform play some of these retro games. So I think that is a new and evolving thing that is always going to push people towards wanting to experience new games. If your favorite streamer starts randomly playing some weirdo 3DO game, just because, that's where the question came from, you're going to be interested in that. And if physical is the only way to do that, then that may be, your only avenue to play it. So I don't know if the bubble is gonna burst. I mean, I think since I started working at Warp Zone about 3 years ago, obviously the pandemic had a lot of effect on pricing, but I think it's calmed down some. Yeah, but I don't think it'll ever like truly burst and everything will be worthless.
I'd like to raise a counterpoint here on the issue, and this goes beyond games, just to this idea of using the impulse of nostalgia as a sort of bait to price gouge. We see companies all the time doing this, from dedicated stores, like a certain DK Oldies, for example, things like that, even to eBay and Facebook Marketplace, of folks just they think they have something extremely rare, folks that maybe want to buy for their friends or family members that are collectors, but they themselves aren't. They don't know the value of these things, so they pay nostalgia prices. And similarly, now that GameStop is starting to reintegrate taking in retro games, or at least this was a conversation that I could have swore I saw happening. I, as a former employee myself, I'm not confident that all employees across the board are going to be able to know how to spot repros and fakes. So it has the potential.
They don't even try to teach them about it. That's the silly part about it. It's not that much to even educate them on it. They don't even take the time to institute the practice.
Exactly so. And so all of this together, if you're being cynical about it, can help push the market towards just prices going up and up and up, with fakes and reproductions being more and more prevalent, unfortunately. And I would be lying if I said I don't get a little cynical about that from time to time.
I absolutely agree with that, and I'll be honest. My collecting have waxed and waned my entire, from childhood till now because of stuff like that. You know what I mean? Or running into a person that's selling your collectible like he's the comic book guy from Simpsons. The thing for me with that stuff is like me and the others, on the call here, we have to look somebody in the eye every week. So it's the kind of thing where it's like we have to also sell an item for something that's fair market value, or else we can't pay anything, equal enough for them to want to sell it to us. And we want our business model is to treat our customer fairly, so that they can come every week and, we can look them in the eye and be like, yeah, you know what I mean? We offered you $5 and sold that game for $10 kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's easier for some of those companies. And I know that, they have a physical shop, but a lot of their businesses, the online model, they don't have to look a person in the face, but I also think they get the less educated collector. And I'm not saying that's all their base. I'm saying it might be somebody that's not price shopping. You know what I mean? They'll go on there and pay $150 for something that they could get at a local shop for $80 or $100. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's just like that person that just goes and pays for whatever it is at the first place they find it.
But are you all I'll be totally honest. I am a bit fearful that this is going to sort of snowball. Maybe not anytime soon, certainly, but 10 years down the line, 15 years, I can't honestly say that I'm especially confident that prices aren't going to just go up and up because of these sort of online practices. At the same time, I got to reiterate again, I am the greenest collector here. I'm the newest to this hobby. And frankly, I think you all have more general video game knowledge than I do, period. So, I mean, if my fears are maybe founded but a bit overstated, I'm happy to be told to settle down.
if it's something that's up but it's plentiful, that's where it doesn't make any sense. If it's something like I always like to compare to comic books, because it just people have had that mindset that Superman #1's worth $1 million. Oh, that makes sense. You know what I mean? If it's old or if it's old video games, and in 10 years from now, an old video game's going to be a different perspective then. You know what I mean? If it's up in price, then that'll make sense. You know what I mean? There might be a way for you to play it otherwise, so you don't have to have that expensive physical copy, just like you could read Superman #1 somewhere. But that person that wants to have that collection, they'll still buy it. But there will be alternatives for somebody that can't afford it. Same thing with me. Like when I collected comics, I wanted every X-Men comics there was. You know what I mean? But good luck getting the first issue, #1, which when I was a child, I could have got it for, I think the cheapest I saw it at a comic book show was $500. You know what I mean? It's tens of thousands of dollars now. You know what I mean? And it's just the kind of thing where the prices will continue to rise, but we all won't be able to have a copy of, Air Raid for Atari. That's a game I've never even seen in person before. It's one of the rarest games there are. It's just one of those things I have to come to accept.
I think the one thing that's worth mentioning is like inflation as a whole will always exist, and that could always impact prices to a slight degree. But I think you can look at stuff like we've talked about, like a Mario or a Pokemon, where like they'll sometimes push a little higher, but they've been very consistent for years and years and years and years.
with a subtle
And
climb to them. You know what I mean? They didn't just one day double in price. They'll be like, it's $5 more than it was last year, kind of thing.
right, like I can't think of a time where Pokemon games were ever cheaper than like $30, even when they were common and plentiful because they were always in demand. But I can't think of any time that I've ever seen them push past like $60 for the more common ones. I mean, there's exceptions like Emerald and Crystal, but again, then you're getting into things that maybe weren't produced as heavily.
And that's the price differencing too. Like, you know, I mean, like not everybody has to get a mint CIB copy of Crystal or a sealed Crystal. They can get a card only copy for around $100, which is pricey, but for something that, you know what I mean, is sought after as it is, it's still within price range of somebody that, oh, I'll save up and get that, you know what I mean, or something.
I was gonna say, I think that thinking that the market is just going to go up and up and up kind of neglects the idea that we're going to have more informed consumers. I mean, there is always in any market going to be those impulse buyers, no matter what. I mean, you see it every day even when we look at eBay for pricing. You know what I mean? If we see like a regularly $15 game randomly go for $80 just because somebody liked the buy it now price, I mean, that's kind of the DK Oldies idea, There's always going to be those consumers, but at the same time, I mean, I think that the more people that get into collecting or stay in collecting, the more informed our circles are. I mean, I think I can say with certainty that nobody in this room with us right now would pay $70 for Mario 64 for the N64.
Yeah.
I've seen it sold recently for that much. I mean, normally I think we price it around like $40. So it's just, informing yourself, and people are impatient by nature. So those impatient people, if they're willing to pay the premium, they will. But I think that informed consumers and informed collectors won't.
My only beef, and I'll go back into the reproduction games, carts. I feel like they're good for people who don't want to pay full price and just want to try one for the hell of it, for nostalgia. $15 for a Pokemon game opposed to 80 or 100, cool. But when you're selling them, you should let the people know what they are. These stores, physical stores and online stores, who purposely don't disclose, and they know they have them because they order them as reproductions and don't disclose or put a label, I think is very wrong. I get upset whenever I see it. And there's stores that resell them at $15-$20, and their thing is, well, it's only $15-$20. They should know what they're buying. And I don't think that's fair, because you don't have people who are educated and don't know any better. And without a label, how are they going to know? And then there's other stores that purposely don't say it and sell them at $50 and $60. And they feel like, oh, people should know what they're buying also. If you're selling reproductions at like normal going rate for an original, why would anyone assume you're selling a fake? The $15, I get that train of thought, but I still think is wrong. I think stores should properly label them if they're going to carry them, and tell their customers what they're buying. Even at $15, I feel like it's a little shady not telling people that's a reproduction.
Absolutely. And let's also not pretend too. I mean, there are well-informed collectors out there that, they're not going to know what how do I want to phrase this? They're not going to know how to spot a repro on every single system, So so let's using myself as an example, if I wanted to do a kindness to a friend who's just getting into collecting for, let's say, the NES, and I say, oh, I found this great NES game. Do you have it? No, I don't have it. Oh, I'll buy it for you. I'm not necessarily going to know an NES convincing repro from an original, even though I could tell that for Game Boy or for what XYZ and so on and so on. But it's hard to know everything, right? So I'm with you, Nick. It's morally reprehensible for these stores to put up copies, even if they're convincing, and sell them dishonestly. It really burns my ass. I don't like it.
Not labeling them what they are is wrong, and buying one by accident happens to the best of us. I did it a year ago. I bought a Mario 64, not paying attention to the label correctly. I'm like, oh, it looks a little off. And in my head, when I say a little off, maybe it got moisture, sun bleach. I took a quick look at it, grabbed it, bought it. And then later I'm like, oh, so it happens. It happens. So you can be educated. You can know what to look for. And sometimes they're that good, and sometimes you just didn't pay attention because I should have been able to spot that. That was my fault. But it happens, man. It doesn't matter how many years you have. Something could get by you. Something could get by you. I mean, the art of reproductions, even Pop's boxes are like getting better and better that I can't tell. They can, Carey can, Nicole, Adam. I can't tell sometimes. I cannot. Like reproductions are serious. Labels are better, boxes are better. I mean, there's always a way to tell. Keep educated, stay on top of it. But
I'm honestly more afraid of that than the prices. I'm afraid of how good the reproduction stuff is getting. You know what I mean? Like it's the fakes. They just keep trying to like eliminate what is an easy tell by like, oh, we'll just copy that better.
That raises an interesting ethical question. Ethical, moral, I mean, whatever you want to call it. Eventually reproductions, I mean, if folks put enough time and effort into it, eventually on a long enough timeline, repros can and will look and function identically to original prints. And then when that time comes, and I don't think it's close, but when it comes, I think the general community is going to have an interesting discussion as to, how much does a reproduction of something matter? If it's that convincing, if it plays identically, if there's virtually no hardware failure anymore, which for folks listening at home, if you don't know, repros often do have failures in their hardware, such as that. Might not always be immediately, but that's a notorious way to tell, especially on carts. It'll be an interesting discussion. I'm certainly not saying that I'm in favor of repros. That's not my position, but it will be interesting when that time comes, I think.
Well, I think that we are kind of at that point, though, because, rare games or rare carts, I mean, repros do exist, and I mean, they do have a value. Like, so, the Nintendo World Championship cart for, obviously, the NES is an expensive, ridiculous cart, the Authentics. But at the same time, I mean, even the reproductions that have been made by like Retro USB, they're still worth, a good amount. I mean, they can be like 100 plus, I think, or more, depending on if they're CIB. So I think that, there's a place for them as well. I think that it'll still be a separate space, but, there's definitely going to be a space for them.
Just to chime in about that, a thing that I'm a big fan about how they do it, though, is you can definitely tell that that's a repro as well. They're like, somebody's just glad to have the functionality to be able to play it like they're at the championship because it's got the switches on it and everything. But like, it's a clear blue cartridge, so there is no, way to confuse it with the original. So I do like that Retro USB and other companies at least make sure to indicate that it's not authentic nor try to make it appear to be.
Yeah, I mean, reproduction market for a time before the thing of like EverDrives were around was a big way in being able to play like unreleased games or games that maybe had a fan translation but were never released here, like the Final Fantasies on the authentic hardware. We've had a lot of technological breakthroughs that make those particular types of reproductions not necessarily as useful as they once were, but they were a very important part of like people learning about say Secret of Mana 2 / Trials of Mana, Final Fantasy 5, the Ghostbusters for the Famicom, the Nintendo's HAL made and stuff like that. So those reproductions, which sometimes aren't even called repros, they're called custom or what have you, but those ones are never really a big issue. It's the ones that are bootlegs more or less of a real game and try to be passed off. Those are the real problems.
This is just a quick aside, but I recently on Facebook Marketplace in Pennsylvania saw a listing for Metroid Zero Mission for GBA, and it's like, oh, okay, that's an expensive little title for the GBA, kind of. And I clicked on the listing, and it was first of all, it was loose, but they were charging CIB price. But the funniest part of it was the cart was green. Oh. They were insisting that it was brand new. They were like, no, dude, I messaged them and I was like, hey, like, I'm just trying to be helpful. You've got a repro. And they're like, no, you don't message me if you don't know what you're talking about. I bought this at the store. And I was like, Metroid Emerald version, man. Sure. Cool, dude. I mean, best of luck to you. That I don't think that listing is up anymore. I think it got taken down. Pretty funny. But this idea of of repros, and you've all touched on this in one manner of verbiage or another, but there are a subset of gamers out there, some real sickos that don't play retro games to collect. They play them because they're fun. Can you believe that? But it brings up this last point of discussion I wanted to have before we talk about the store. And it's this notion of emulation, right? So I wanted to kind of make it just a generalized discussion. I've talked about emulation on the show before, and I think most listeners that have been listening know my position on it. TLDR, if it's a big company, no harm, no foul. They're not going to lose sleep over it. But here's the thing, is that some of these games, let's use Xenosaga Episode 3 as an example. It's locked on PS2. You cannot play it legally anywhere else. And it had an extremely limited run due to the failure, quote unquote, of Xenosaga 2. And, nowadays, the last time I checked, it was somewhere around $250 for a CIB copy. So now emulation is often the way that folks will play and get to experience some of these older games. And it's not just availability and price, although that's a big part of it. It's quality of life things like save states. It's upgrading textures. It's things like that to make them a little bit easier to swallow in the modern age. So what I wanted to ask is just generally, do any of you have strong feelings one way or the other about emulation? Morally, of course, but moreover in terms of how it interacts with and its relationship with physical retro gaming. Sorry, that was a bit long-winded, as I tend to be, as you all know. But the floor is now yours. What do you all think about emulation?
So my opinion with emulation, I have a very strong stance, and the stance is that emulation is, again, we kind of touched on when we were talking a little bit earlier, but emulation is a big part of why some people even have the ability to get into retro gaming. They discover through emulation, some game they fall in love with, and then they go, well, man, I want to own the original game. And maybe, it's a game that's $5, or maybe it's a game that's $500, and maybe it's something they can't necessarily do, but it encourages them to get into the, scene, as it were, however they do. Without emulation, I think a lot of games would have been lost to time and space years ago that, were, prototype games that, the cartridges aren't necessarily built to last the same way. They've given us quality of life. There's so many different cool aspects that emulation's brought around, whether it's, just the simple stuff like save state and fast forwarding for like an RPG to kind of not waste your time a little bit. I've used it a couple times. But even like newer stuff, there's a website called Retro Achievements. It's basically brought the whole achievement system, and it's all community driven and community sourced. But it's brought like the achievement system that they introduced in the 360 era to these older video games, and have kind of given, I've seen a lot of people online and stuff who will really like dig into a game a lot more deeply, or maybe go play a game they normally wouldn't have because of it. And the other big thing is that I think that to some extent too, emulation has made games, like certain games, more popular later on. Like not specifically up until like the Switch era, but there's been a couple like places that have mentioned that like they saw these games were really getting popular among people and thought it was worth re-releasing these games. They saw money on the table because they saw that these games were still being played and presented, as opposed to just letting them sit there and languish and lose all that money. They didn't look at it as piracy or as they're stealing a sale from us. Like, we could be making this money if we just made it easier to do. Which you could go back, if you want to look for comparisons back to the Napster's day, the Napster day of music stuff. Music piracy was really rampant and a problem until the music industry adapted to the way people consumed music better, which, there's a lot of arguments about how that money is divvied up. At the end of the day, people weren't pirating as much once they made it easier to buy music digitally. And even more so, piracy on movies and stuff was seen a lot less when Netflix came around and made it more convenient. So the argument basically is if you put these games out for people to buy, they're less likely to just have to go through those means. But they're also the means by which a lot of the history of gaming currently is presented, because it's the only way for us to preserve it. and it's a lot of people can afford to do at this point. So emulation to me is a net positive in pretty much every aspect, and I don't really have any negative feelings. And I think that anybody who kind of gatekeeps people who only can, only or decide to play games just in that form, not necessarily something I totally agree with. I do think there's a lot of arguments. People say, well, emulation would hurt a store or a smaller, these businesses that want to keep these retro games. And I don't think that's the case at all. I know plenty of people who do a mixture or did emulation and got into retro gaming and all that kind of stuff. So I think emulation is a very, very important tool, not just like in terms of the current, but just in the history of retro gaming as a whole.
Really well said, man. And I'm not going to take up too much time. I'm going to lobby it to somebody else. I just wanted to clarify my position real quick in case we have new listeners. When I said, gung ho emulation before, don't emulate, games from indie devs that are just starting out. Obviously, these certain companies who shall not be named have loads and loads and loads of money, as that one old British joke commercial character, I don't know, used to say. They're not getting hurt, but don't emulate from the little indie devs. They're trying their best. Anyways, sorry. Nicole, I think I saw your square light up. Did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I'm pro emulating pretty much on every level. I mean, besides obviously the legality side, which, can be discussed in many different forums. But one thing that's very important to me that Adam briefly touched upon was the historical and saving of games. Because I think I read recently that 90% of games are being lost to time or something like that. And, that kind of touched me in a way because I really like old movies as well. And, it just makes me think of all of the silent films that have been lost either to fire or, they didn't think they had any value. And I think that emulation is just the way that we need to be able to preserve this media. We may reach a point where physical cartridges, I doubt, will ever really go bad, but, disc rot is a real thing. And it's just something that we're going to need to do to be able to access these games. I'm a big fan of ROM dumping any prototypes that are out there. I know that some people grade them and encapsulate them, but I just think that that's something that needs done before that sort of thing is, happens to those items because, it's cool, if they ROM dump something and, it's like your favorite game, you get to see all the brand new little things that they thought of or whatever, and I just think emulating is probably always going to have a part, especially in the retro gaming community. And I agree with Adam that it's not necessarily a prohibitive or a bad thing for retro gaming stores. And again, gatekeeping, if anybody that plays on an emulator, I think is kind of a weird thing. And I did not know about that retro achievements website. So thank you for that, Adam. That's awesome. And the only other thing I would say is if, an emulator isn't working great, I would say that maybe you should be on real physical media, if only to actually experience it the way that the devs made it. I know that a lot of people think that PS1 and N64 graphics are really hurting, but at the same time, if you actually play that on the TV that it was made to be played on, it's going to be a lot better, because that shading and those styles are a lot more forgiving on an old TV than they would be on a flat screen. So,
or if you're like me and don't have the room for a CRT, little buzz marketing here, check out the RetroTink devices. I have one myself and I absolutely adore it. It's terrific.
So I want to touch on how Adam brought up Napster in regards to this stuff, just because emulation, you know what I mean? It's getting to play something without having the, actual access or the physical media. I mean, there's been a way to preview things forever. You know what I mean? I remember recording a Weird Al cassette, you know what I mean, at my friend's house, and the only thing that they don't tell you is if you copy a copy of a copy, it gets faster every time. So mine was a little faster than the original guys and yada yada, but Same thing with like, there's copy protection on the VHS tape. Oh, not if I put a piece of tape over the little square on the back, I can record, whatever's on, TV tonight. It's something that's never deterred me, even though I've done stuff like that. I still had a huge movie collection. I still had a huge music collection, and I have a huge video game collection. And don't get me wrong, there's lots of games that I'll emulate, but while I'm playing, I'll be like, the controls just feel slightly off, or just something, you know what I mean? Like, but it's a great way to preview stuff or play it if I don't have access to it via, media that I have access to currently. I don't have ill will towards anybody that uses it. I don't gatekeep for it. I'll be honest, the most gatekeeping I've seen is people that like shame you for spending $100 on a game instead of emulating it. It's typically what I'm more used to.
Yeah, and there's a part of me that totally gets that. Am I going to? We're doing an episode on Earthbound in September, which I'm extremely excited for because I've never played it. I've never played more than 30 minutes of it, and I'll be frank, I can't afford to just drop money on Earthbound right now. Not at all.
I wouldn't want to buy Earthbound by today's prices. That's for sure.
It's crazy, man. So I'm glad to hear that we're all more or less on the same page regarding emulation. It's not ultimately going to hurt the physical brick and mortar stores. It's a great way for people to get into the hobby, to appreciate the art of gaming, right? I'm with you. I forget which one of you said it was a net good, but whoever said that, I'm fully on board.
I basically feel like for anything in life, options are good. So anytime you can have multiple options, for me, is a positive. So although I will always be a physical collector, I am for emulating for people, just not for myself. That's not my choice, but I feel like it is important to have those options. It's a great thing for other people to have. I'm hard-headed and just like collecting my stuff.
Rick, you brought up a good point, though, with your little thing about Earthbound. I mean, a lot of these companies either sometimes have the rights to a property, but don't do anything with it. Like, we're blessed that Nintendo has decided to put Earthbound on Nintendo Switch Online, so it does make it a lot easier to play. But, I think that those companies need to realize that, the want is out there for that. And I know that sometimes it's a little bit of a hem-haw of maybe these two companies have worked together and now they won't anymore, or this, that, or the other. Who owns the rights for it? But I think that, in general, if the companies, take the steps to even make them available digitally, they're losing money just by ignoring that avenue, I think.
Because just porting it over to a way to access it in the current system's not a major thing. You don't have to have a total remaster as long as you can just make it function on the current platform.
Yeah, and we've seen that recently. I mean, granted, the launch of the port for Legend of Dragoon was, in a word, terrible, but they fixed it pretty quickly. Unfortunately, I mean, some of these other ports like Chrono Cross and Glover on Steam are notoriously just terrible, but it is what it is. I mean, if here's ultimately where I fall. If the companies aren't going to do anything about it, if there is a want to play these games, I'm going to go back to Xenosaga because it's trapped on PS2. There's a want to play them, and there is no legal way to do so outside of spending exorbitant sums of money. People are going to find workarounds, and that's just fine. That's just fine.
What do they say? Life
finds a way.
Yeah.
That's great. That's perfect. Well, I cannot think of a better way to segue into talking about the store, the physical store, Warp Zone, because this podcast, as they say, it's found a way. So I'm going to put in a special surprise music break. Ooh. I don't ever do this in episodes. I never announce my music breaks in episodes, but I'm doing it now. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the store that you all run so well. Welcome back, everybody. So, my guests today, of course, Adam, Carey, Nicole, and Nick. You all are part of the Warp Zone. That is a physical retro and nostalgia-based store, as it's said on your website. And I wanted to talk a little bit about it because, obviously I'm a big fan. We've got another store patron, Brad. He's in our Discord. He's a listener. He's a huge fan of the store and
Hi,
of
Brad.
you guys as well. Shout out to Brad. I actually don't know if Brad will listen to this, but I hope he does. So Warp Zone started out as an eBay shop that grew into a small physical store and then eventually upgraded into the current iteration to a larger, brick and mortar store. And it seems like you all have been growing ever since your inception. So I told one of you, I think it may have been either Carey or Nick, to put a pin in this at the beginning, but I am unleashing said pin because I want to hear more about your origin story.
Yeah, basically it all stems from that desire to start collecting Nintendo games, like I said, when I was going back to school. And as I wanted to continue my collection, I would just go out and buy, people's stuff at yard sales and stuff at flea markets, and big collection here, big collection there. And I had to do something because it was usually like a buy it all scenario, take what I need for my collection and then have all this left over. So I started selling stuff on eBay because I had, prior to selling that, I used to sell Magic cards on there. And we had a different name for it back then. We actually had it called Treasure Hunt because I jokingly called it treasure hunting because I'm not a jewelry guy. I didn't even realize there was a jewelry store called Treasure Hunt. So for a period of time on eBay, it was that. And believe it or not, when we opened our previous location, it actually had a treasure hunt sign on the front of it. And a man from the actual store showed up one day very angry about it. Well, what was funny is they actually let me register the name because it was in a different, it wasn't a jewelry store, basically. But yeah, I willingly changed the name, not because the gentleman showed up, because I had already put it into works to do so, because I was getting calls on the phone about selling us earrings and stuff like that. And yeah, we actually had a sign on the building and everything. And once we started getting phone calls about selling this jewelry, I was getting flustered about it because I'd be like, I don't want people to think that's us. And so I was talking on the phone with my wife at the office job I had at the time, and I was like, we're gonna have to change the name to something, I don't know, something like Warp Zone or something. And just like how Kirby was a placeholder they got used, you know what I mean? That's the exact same thing for the name for the store, because it was just quick thought, final thought. And we, for the longest time, it was, eBay business, because we didn't have, a physical location. We didn't have any other real means of selling. We opened up, we were walking through a neighborhood nearby our house the one day, and we saw the old location for rent. And it, when we contacted the person, it was quite affordable because it was just a little place, in the middle of nowhere. And we set up shop there. And what's funny is at the beginning, I didn't even get to work at the shop for the first couple of years because I had a full-time job I had to be at. And so my wife would literally wheel our two children at the time in a wheelbarrow to the, not wheelbarrow, what do you call it? The radio flyer thing.
Wagon?
Yes, like the little radio flyer wagon. Wheelbarrow. We threw our children in a wheelbarrow and ran down the road with them. But because it was only a couple blocks from our house, so when I would go to the office, she would open the store, and Warp Zone, believe it or not, had a little play area in the back for the children. It had the little early school desks, and it had their toys and stuff there. So we only got a couple customers a day when we first opened, and so it was basically my wife having to watch our children at a different location that wasn't as comfortable. We hoped that we would get customers. And in the early the first year, Nick decided to come to the shop the one day after moving here from New Jersey, and I was on a business trip in Florida, and my wife calls and she's like, yeah, there's this guy here, and he says that he can help us with these Ninja Turtles, because my wife didn't know how to put, they had all the play sets and stuff like that. So, he comes in and he helps them out. If you want to interject anything about this interaction, Nick.
Yeah, so like I said earlier, I never got out of toys. Games I was in and out at one point, but toys was something I just never got out of. So when I had just moved to Pittsburgh, I was maybe up here 5, 6 months. So the store was probably open 5, 6 months, and I was Google searching video games and toys because I would randomly pick up a game, but it was like predominantly toys. And I found his location on Google, and I drove over there, and I walk in, and there's a lady behind the counter. And I'm one of those nosy guys. I try to look behind the counter and see what's on the floor and what's not out yet, because I'll ask, hey, is that for sale? Hey, how much is that? And as I'm doing a walk around, it was predominantly toys in there at the time. There was board games. He had some game related stuff, but a lot of toys. I see these two big bins behind the counter, and I see the turtles. So I still collected turtles at the time. So I'm like, hey, what's in those bins? And she's like, well, we just bought that collection off someone. It's not sorted. We don't even know when we're going to have time to put it all together. And I'm like, you want me to help? And she's like, you know Ninja Turtles? I'm like, well, yes, I do. I had a very large turtle collection I had just finished packing and moving to Pennsylvania with. So I had just recently took it all apart. So I slid the two bins out, and I'm like, wow, you look like you have most of it. And she's like, really? And I'm like, yeah. And I literally put together, I don't know how many play sets, the Technodrome, the Turtle Man, the Turtle Lair, put a bunch of weapons with the original Turtles, some weapons I knew for some of the other characters, some I didn't. And I would probably put together, I would say 70% of what they bought. And she was just so impressed on how quick I did it. And she was just so nice to me, and I was nice to her. And she was like, wow. I was like, can I buy a few of these? And she's like, sure. After helping us, no problem. And she looked up a few prices, and she gave me a nice break on them. And I was like, wow, I like this place. I'm coming back. And she's like, oh, I got to tell my husband about you. And I stopped in 2 days later just in case they got new toys, and was looking around. She was like, I told my husband he's excited to meet you. He should be back next week. And then I think I came again a day or two later, and he happened to come back early. And I walked in, and I looked up and saw some random guy standing there. She's like, oh, honey, hey, this is the guy I told you about. And he like paused for a minute, looked at me, and then was like, hey, and was like polite. And I never knew why he paused. He just
I told him after the fact, I was like, because I'm expecting some like really, nerdy looking action figure collector guy, not to knock anybody, but, people always tease me that I dress like Bobby Hill, basically. And I expect to see some, chubby, white, nerdy guy like myself. You know what I mean? Like, the funny thing is, when Nick first came here from New Jersey, he cuts up a lot more now, but I used to have a hard time getting him to crack a smile when I would tell jokes and stuff, because he was always like mean mugging for pictures and stuff like that. So it was just like not what you expect, you know what I mean? This dude's like looking hard, you know what I mean?
I was a lot bigger. I was probably like easy when I moved up here, 150 pounds more, 130 pounds more, way bigger beard before my gray started growing in, and a lot more serious coming from where I came from. I kind of, you're taught to keep a guard up. So over time, I eased up. And as I get older, I'm just a big teddy bear. But, you kind of carry yourself that way. So when he first met me, I guess he was surprised.
I kind of already talked about yours, Nicole. If you want to chime in your perspective of like your experience of coming here.
Yeah. So back around the beginning of 2020, I was newly out of a job, but then at this exact same time the pandemic happened, and I was pregnant, so I needed a job. And I had previously met Carey, obviously, because my wife and I went to Warp Zone, and I did used to work at a restaurant, and we made gluten-free donuts, so I would always bring the extras over to him because I knew he and his family would appreciate them, and they just get tossed anyway. So I posted on Facebook like, hey, like, is anybody like looking for like some help with anything or whatever? And Carey responded,
"Dude, this is the nice person that's nice to me and gives me food."
right, but like at this point, like we weren't like friends. I mean, we were, but like, you know what I mean?
We were friendly, you know what I mean? Like, it was like we were like happy to talk to each other, but we didn't like.
So I started working there right around the time that he got Tom's collection, which was a really big like collection of NES stuff. And I pretty much like fell into the store like feet first, because besides the stuff that, I knew about and collected, like I learned a lot of things in all these years, let me tell you, just
That was a
because the amount of like stuff that I was exposed to right off the gate, you know, like all of like the high-end NES heavy hitters, like I'd never even seen any of those before in my life.
It was a 20-foot U-Haul for like, you know, her starting period there. So it was like, all right, sorry, the whole store's destroyed. Absolutely.
Yeah, so I came in and basically would just wade through bins of stuff every day and try to make some sense of the chaos because they unloaded the van or the truck and it just came all right into the old store.
Oh my.
And so that the nice thing was, I mean, like it was bad that it was the pandemic, but at the same time, like, you know, he had just started being closed during the week. So like I had all this time to go in and like test things and bundle things and bin things and, you know, work through it. And yeah, I mean, like, you know, and I've worked there pretty much ever since, you know, from baby warps and all the way up, and it's been a ride for sure. And a good ride. Not like, oh, it was a ride, a good ride.
Sometimes it's a bad ride.
Hey man, everything's a bad ride sometimes.
We get through it. I was gonna kind of touch on yours, Adam, but I'm kind of more curious to see from your side because I know we've dipped in and out through different events and stuff like that.
Yeah, so Carey and I have I moved to Pittsburgh in 2015, and I had worked for a different company at the time. I was working for a company that doesn't exist anymore, but they used to make reproduction cartridges, not like the fan translations and release stuff. And they, I would go to shows, and we would vend at the same shows together. So like we have a local show here called Steel City Con, and we both were vendors there, and we would run in and talk to each other and stuff. And I don't remember as much, but I definitely remember talking to Carey, and I think Amy was around too at the time. But I remember talking and stuff. But Carey had much more vivid memories of these like shows than I did, mostly because I was starting to do these shows like 2 months into moving to Pittsburgh, so I was still very overwhelmed with just the giant change.
I think the thing that I remembered from the show the most that it made me laugh was I remember bewildering you because you didn't really know who I was yet, and I just kind of literally came behind and sat behind at your booth with you. And just
I didn't remember until you told me about it, and I'm like, oh, I do kind of remember that.
Well, like, I could just see how it was off-putting to you, but I just ignored it. You know?
Yeah, now it's fine because nowadays you would have done it. I'd have basically just snuggled right back out, like moved the chair over 2 inches closer. But eventually that job, I left that job a few years later, but I was still coming in and out of the store, whenever I could, because I'm, Pittsburgh. We say Pittsburgh as a term, but Pittsburgh's a very large area when you start including all the suburbs and everything. I'm closer to the heart of Pittsburgh, where Carey's a bit farther on the outskirts. So it's like a 45-50 minute drive, and he's only open on weekends. So it's all about, getting there. It's not as easy as just jumping in the car and taking a 5-minute ride over to the local sock hop or
we do like the local sock hops.
Me, not anybody else, just me though.
Yeah. Now I can go for a good soda pop, but that's beside the point. But then where things like recently had changed. So after I left that last job, I went to work for GameStop, which you have familiarity with, Rick, and Carey has familiarity with. I think the three of us have all worked at a gaming store before Warp Zone.
I kind of feel like the person that got out of Scientology first and then just talked to you guys like, no, you got to get out of there, guys.
Yeah. So I was both kind of unhappy with my job at the time, and for a minute, my wife had lost her job. So everything was, between the post-pandemic and just like life change stuff, I was just like, all right, I need to do a little something different. So it started with me volunteering just to help out occasionally. Like we did something during the anniversary sale where I just kind of just helped out. And then there was like, oh, we're going to be busy this weekend. You want to come do a day? And then it just kind of slowly snowballed into, I guess Carey thought I was a decent enough dude to have around more often, and now I'm there all the time.
It's kind of like after all of a sudden he's at like a ceremony, we're all in hoods and we got paddles, and he's like, oh no.
Yeah,
and then I was like, but the robes do look really nice.
They do. We're all about the pageantry.
You have to thought of the committee. You have to be considered by the committee.
I feel like we trade one Scientology for another now.
That's all it is in this world.
It's true, and well, to be fair, you guys don't often bring out the robes and paddles when the customers are around.
It's true.
Though I can attest, it's a party when they come out.
I think I'm the only one that skipped the ceremony, only because I've been out there like 10 and a half years. And was Nicole going to give birth? And you were like, you want to start helping me? And I was like, sure. Like, I literally been hanging out there like 10 and a half years. And then like almost 2 years ago, he was like, you want to start helping? I need a hand. Right? Nicole, you were going to give birth, right? That's why you were gone?
Yeah. It was like, hey, so like, I'm like not going to be here. It's like, not that Carey didn't know, but we were like, for real. So we have to like find some more helpers. So
I kind of joked about that at the time, though, because like how you said that, like Carey didn't know, but sometimes he's a goofball. I joked about how I'd come into work and like, where's Nicole at? Like, Carey, she had a baby. I'm like, still?
Again?
What's funny though? You know how many customers have probably been coming to you for years, and I would hang out there so much that they were probably like, why is there always a tow truck in Warp Zone? There's always a tow truck in front of Warp Zone, and the thing is, I was always in there just hanging out in between calls for like years. There was 2 or 3 summers that was like dead in the middle of summer, and I would be there all day, like all day. Damn near.
He would send me a message because we wouldn't be open yet. He'd be like, "You at the shop?" I'm like, "I'm heading over."
I can attest. I definitely remember days I would come in, and I would, we didn't go out as often. When we went out, we sat around and BS'd and hung out for like an hour or two. And there were definitely times where like, I think at first I thought Nick actually did work there.
I think a lot of people always thought that.
I was like a decoration or something, and then eventually he's like, "You might as well work for me." Okay.
So I wanted to ask something that I was thinking about as I was putting, just these notes together of ideas of where to steer the conversation. What is an aspect of opening a physical business that was surprisingly challenging for you? I mean, related to a gaming / nostalgia business, sure, or just a business in general. Maybe something you didn't know or something that was more drawn out than you were expecting.
How long it takes to make it sustainable, like to where it's not just a little bit of extra income or something to do. You really have to power through those early times. Like this is because I look back on the books when we do tax stuff sometimes, and just try to watch our growth and whatnot. And our first year, we literally made less than what we make in a weekend here now. Like that's
wow.
Yeah. And I was just thinking to myself, like, oh my God, we didn't even cover the rent like my first year. That I made our payday for the person helping Amy at the shop my payday at work because I knew I wouldn't have money from the shop to pay him. But it's the kind of thing where like it didn't bother me because I knew like any business is like that. You know what I mean? Like you have to, unless you're just like extremely lucky or have like some like magical funding at the beginning, you're going to struggle for a while. And, the struggle never goes away. It just changes. You know what I mean? Like we struggle now at times because we try to grow. And when we try to grow, it's expensive. And then you don't realize just how expensive it is. And then you have to accommodate that and get used to it and figure out new ways to do things so you can hit a higher mark. Or it's tough when you're in a collectible market too, because if you have to move a high volume every week to keep up with expenses, it's not like you can just hop on Walmart and reorder some of this stuff.
Oh, sure. Speaking of that, is there anything that's a particular struggle for not just a business, but specifically a retro gaming business?
A lot of people, I would say, have like unrealistic expectations sometimes about how we get our items. So like they'll come in and be like, well, when are you going to get, Xenosaga 2 on PS2? And we're like, I don't know. It depends on when people trade stuff in. So, we are pretty much, I would say, at the mercy in terms of like accessories and controllers and things like that to what comes in. So Carey and I have definitely been working on trying to supplement that by finding other sources of those items, because everyone always wants them.
And that's a challenge for us because some of them we can find nice third-party representations of. So if we don't have the OEM's hardware traded in that week or that month, you know what I mean, and we're run out of it, we can at least supplement with another option that's not as good, but it's almost as good. There's a lot of them we can't find like a decent, replacement for. Or like we ran into an instance where, because normally when you order them, the third party ones, it won't have any branding on it. It'll have, sometimes the symbols won't even be on them for the buttons because it's all branded stuff. And, that's what makes it not legal to sell, basically. We ordered some before and it's like they'll come and there'll be an exact replica and we don't want that because that's what we would classify as a bootleg. You know what I mean? So it's like, that's the dilemma for us is, when they get traded in, half of them are broken, or they don't come in frequently because a lot of people only have the one with the system when they're trading it in, and it's a tough balance to maintain because we also don't want to, even though we could sell some of the ones we have, we want to make sure we keep enough paired for the systems that are in the back. Like for when the one on the shelf sells, we don't want to not have a controller for the ones in back stock.
Sure, that makes sense. I can imagine that being at the mercy of just, what comes in and not being able to control that can be a little frustrating at times. But I mean, that's kind of the nature. I think most folks that are collecting and frequenting these stores understand that. I can imagine the trouble comes in when it's like, like we talked about before with other online stores, when you get the family members that come in and they're looking to buy for their grandson, Timmy. And, it's like, well, where's this? We don't have it in right now.
Right.
Why? Or not to pick on that one lady that I saw when I was there, but they'll come in and they don't necessarily know about the hobby because they're maybe helping a family member or what have you, and they get a little testy. How will I know that you won't just swap my system out for another system whenever you take it in for a repair?
I remember that one too. There was a person trading in 2 PS4 systems, and they were so worried about having me make sure I noted the serial numbers on their ticket and stuff like that, and I was confused because I've never had somebody be that stressed unless it was like a PS5 or something. You know what I mean? Where it's like it was greater value like. PS4's, $150-ish system, you know what I mean, depending which model you have. And she just kept saying, well, what if you swap them? I'm like, why would I swap a working one of my PS4s for your broken ones? I can't even, if you can explain that to her. I mean, I gave her what she wanted, but I literally had to say that to her after she asked the third or fourth time.
Yeah, we're being dropped off for repairs.
I know, but that's what I'm saying is I was trying to explain to her. I was like, there's no world where it makes sense that I would want your broken one for my good one. You know what I mean?
One thing I think that people overestimate is that it's so much easier just to be honest and transparent than it is to try and pull one over on somebody, because that happened to me with an NES too. They were like, well, what if this isn't my NES? Well, why would we do that?
Right. There's no reason to.
Actually trying to insinuate it wasn't his NES and we swapped it out. And I was like, well, when you dropped it off, you were asking questions and I asked you to take a picture. Where's the picture you took? And he said, right here in my phone. And he looked for it. And when he saw the picture, his face changed and he was like, oh, I'm sorry. That is my NES. I don't remember that scratch.
And that's the big thing here. We all push, you know what I mean? Just try to treat people fairly. We're not ever trying to dupe anyone. We're never trying to, you know what I mean? We try to educate somebody that comes in. There's a grandma that comes in and, we'll be like, you know what? There's this, but we have maybe a better option. It's a couple dollars less because they, if a person trusts you because you're continuously helpful and honest with them, they'll keep coming back. There's no reason, it's the same thing with the price model we talked about earlier where yeah, you'll burn somebody a couple times possibly, but after a while, somebody doesn't want to be consistently overcharged, basically. You know what I mean? It's the kind of thing where we try to make sure we're very competitive with our prices. It's very rare that somebody else at a physical location has something below our price. And if they do, I'm not, unagreeable to have a discussion about what we have something priced at as well. That's the thing about it that's different here. You know what I mean? We're not going to get angry if you're like, hey, will you take $35 for this $40 game? I think it might have gone down a little bit. You know what I mean? Anybody that's ever come up to us, and just respectfully indicated that, maybe we were off on the price I'm always willing to listen. The person that comes up and, is nasty about it, I'll still talk to them and, we'll make a deal about it. But it's just, I'm never going to be ignorant to you about it. You know what I mean? Like, we can always have a conversation, and then I'll be like, well, the last two went for 120. That's why I have it at 100. It's probably the worst you're going to hear from me.
Well, that's like the Wii, for instance, and everyone at the store has done it. Carey, me, Nicole, Adam. Someone will come in the system, and my system died. I need a new Wii. I'm like, well, do you want me to just sell you a deck? I don't have to sell you the whole system, and it'll save you money. And they act so surprised that we're trying to help them and get less money out of them. Same thing for the controller. Some people don't know that there is some games that need the Motion Plus controller. We sell a $5 adapter. So sometimes when they come to buy a controller and they'll ask, hey, do you have a Motion Plus controller? Which, we sell for $5 more than a normal one. And we'll tell them, hey, we have a $5 adapter. You don't have to buy another controller. And they're like, huh? Like, yeah, that little adapter, $5, and it makes your normal Wii controller a Motion Plus, basically the equivalent of a normal one. And they're so surprised we're willing to sell them a $5 adapter instead of trying to sell them a full price controller. It's because we're all gamers at heart, whether we still play a lot or a little bit, and we want to be helpful. And that's the store's model. Like, we try to be honest and be helpful, and it's a good team. It's a good people, and so we never ever want to charge someone for something we don't have to.
There's an old King of the Hill episode. It's a dated reference, but like, Hank Hill was in a selling contest for the propane that he sells, and there was somebody there doing like shady kind of sales tactics, and at the whole time it's the whole tortoise and the hare scenario, because the whole time the other employee is winning the contest. But at the end, Hank wins because there was an old gentleman that he kept being helpful to the whole time, and then that guy bought it for like his trailer park kind of thing. And that's the kind of thing that I like think about, or like we discuss here, is just like, it's not making that quick money. Then it's making a long-term customer that trusts you and comes back, and they expect to be treated fairly, because that's how we try to treat you. And it's like, we've had misunderstandings with customers and stuff like that, and we always talk to people about stuff and explain things, and we want people to feel like they're valued and respected. That's the thing about it, is nobody wants to feel like they're being used. You know what I mean? Like, if somebody's in here, our regulars, we treat them well because they take care of us, and we want to take care of them.
Absolutely. And I think that exact mentality is a huge boon for all of the growth that you've been experiencing and receiving. And also, just as an aside, R.I.P. Johnny Hardwick.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah, voice actor for Dale, R.I.P.
I did hear
Real
that.
shame.
It makes me so sad because they're rebooting it.
I know.
Yeah, they haven't said yet if he recorded anything, if it's far enough along that he already recorded or not.
I do want to be mindful of time, because I'm looking at the clock counter here. I just have one final question before we wrap up. What are your plans for the future for Warp Zone that you can reveal to the public anyway? You just moved, you've got a very active Facebook page. You've just moved to TikTok, I think I saw. And if you have anything that you can reveal, what are some future plans you all have?
We're going to be shoring the building up a lot this year. That's kind of honestly what's held us back a little bit from progressing the store more than we have already. And a lot of people would probably think it's already progressed pretty far, but there's a lot of things that we've had to delay, finalizing the grid wall and other elements in the arcade and stuff like that. And once we get the structural stuff of the building shored up, we can start doing more fun, decorative stuff. I'd like to, in a stretch goal, a couple years time, and I know it's going to sound silly the way I say it, be like Pee-wee's Playhouse in here, where there's like moving elements and decorative elements that are like lit up and do things and stuff like that. Because for me, it's all about the atmosphere. When I come in here, I feel like I'm firing up a starship every day. You know what I mean? Like, I go through and it's like, this place has working mechanisms that I want running, because if that TV's not on kicking this music and that arcade's not set to this, like, it just doesn't feel right to me. And I want the atmosphere is one of the most important elements to me. So that's one of the things we'll be doing. We're going to try to do, I know you said something about the skits earlier to me before the podcast. We're going to try to definitely do more skits. The challenge with those is we keep trying to do them of higher quality, so they're time consuming, and it's hard to sneak them in because it's coordinating all these people's schedules together when we already are so busy. But we have so much fun making them. I definitely want to advance our TikTok with stuff like that, and I am hoping once we get a handle on like the growth, like being able to navigate the busyness and stuff like that, we can just keep doing more fun stuff like that, contests and videos, and there's a lot of stuff. Is there anything that I've talked about to you, Nicole or Adam or Nick, that I'm forgetting to mention?
If I have it my way, costumes. More costumes.
Nick, that could be you can wear a costume to work every day if you want, buddy.
I mean, I would just say, there's no shortage of ideas from Carey in any way. He's inexplainably creative and comes up with a lot of really cool stuff and things like I would have never thought of. Carey and I work well together because we're opposites. So we get to point out things to each other. But I have no doubt that, Warp Zone is going to be like the ultimate experience in every way at some point, when everything's, shored up and we've got like the logistical stuff handled, you'll walk in and everyone will have like their own like entrance sound where it's like, John Cena! But like, it'll be your name.
I did forget about that. I did want to almost create like a station in behind the counter that's almost like a DJ station to control some of the elements in the store. That's what Nicole's referencing. I want it to be like where like different things happen when people come in and out of the store and other stuff like that.
Yeah, he has like a karaoke like mic and stuff too. We haven't gotten to bust it out that much, but
yes.
And that'll eventually clearly play into the Pee-wee's Playhouse when somebody says the secret word, right?
Exactly.
Exactly. But also, too, we, may need to find a bigger conch shell down the road, too. So who knows, 5 or 10 years from now, I've told the others we might outgrow this location. I'm not trying to get... It's basically, I don't have ambitions to be big forever. It's just going to kind of grow until I'm like, okay, that's enough. Sometimes I feel that way now, but it's only been a year and we filled this building up pretty darn fast. So I don't want to like, restrict us, by not growing. So maybe somewhere down the road we can buy a large enough building that we have more like fun center kind of stuff, like how we came here to build the arcade.
Man, I told you like 7 years ago you should have got the shop and save.
I couldn't afford the shop and save. It's aside from the mortgage, you got to think about what it costs. Heating and cooling and electric and stuff like that, my man. I know what it costs for this building. I can't imagine shop and save.
I'm just teasing you, bro.
I know, but it would be cool.
Well, I for one look forward to the day that somebody utters the word Square Enix and everybody screams because it's the secret word. I can't wait for that personally. So, Carey, Nick, Nicole, Adam, I really can't thank the four of you enough for joining me. It's been great getting to know each of you for the past however many months. It's been great learning from each of you. And, it's been great building up my own collection with all of your help. And I knew as soon as I wanted to do a retro roundtable that I wanted to ask each of you. I know I dropped the ball on scheduling a couple times, communication technical difficulties that I did not anticipate, but all in all, we made it through, we braved the weather, and we put out, if I may say so, a damn fine episode. So, folks, thank you again. You can find Warp Zone, dear listeners, on the interwebs. That's www.internet.com. You'll find their links in the episode description. What the hell? I'll throw up the TikTok channel in the description too. Why not? Why not?
We had so much fun making that BC Boys parody video. I was ecstatic with how it turned out, and like the thing about it is like we could increase the production value, even more. But I kind of find a charm to it having a balance between decently made, but also you can tell that some goofball's just running around with his telephone filming this.
It turned out terrific, guys. It really did. So, with that, I want to say thank you once again to these four amazing guests and for them taking so much of their time to talk with me. Folks listening, if you want to check out more of Warp Zone, again, check out the links in the episode description. If you want to check out more of Pixel Project Radio, well, wherever you're listening right now is probably as good of a place as any. Just hit that subscribe button. We've got a lot of great episodes. If you want to hang out with us on social media, we are mainly on Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky. Blue Sky is now the place to be, as far as I understand it. You can find those links in the description as well, and an invite to our Discord. I love our Discord. It's a great little community. It's not too big yet. Lots of great stuff to talk about, post all of your memes and shit posting, brag about your collections, and so on and so forth. It's a really great time. You'll also find a link to our Patreon page if you want to help support the show monetarily. It's always appreciated, but never expected. So, with all of that out of the way, I am going to check once again, and it looks like my price on price charting, son of a bitch, it's gone down. Well, you should have bought me when you had the chance, listeners. I'm Rick Firestone, your host, as always. Thank you to the Warp Zone staff for being incredible people, and thank you for listening. We'll catch you next time.